Professor Damodaran has been with economics area in IMB, including visiting faculty professor, and he has also been environmental fellow with the US Environmental Protection Agency, and a visiting scholar at the University of California at Berkeley in 1994. Apart from that, he has visited various places like University of Russia in 2012, and he was the visiting fellow at United Nations University Institute of Advanced Studies in Japan. Sorry, the achievements are so many, I can only list and pick a few. He was also awarded the Homi Bhabha Fellowship 2004 as the member of International Expert Group in the field of environmental management.
Following Rupa Chanda is not an easy option. Either you have to be a great singer or you have to be very musical in your speech. I am neither. I am not going to present any, I am anticipating your question, I am not going to present any data. That's partly because, it is not because I have a disdain for data, but there is so much of data around in this world that I sometimes feel a bit uncomfortable. But I will talk about what technologies do to make data accessible. And this is the work I am doing currently, distributed network technologies. Let me make it very clear. It's very simple. It's not about blockchains alone. It is about blockchains, Internet of Things, and that artificial intelligence coming in. It's a convergence of the three. Now, I have been working on cryptocurrencies, and I have been now looking at a very old passion of mine, which is on commodity chains. I used to work, there was a time when I used to work on plantations, commodities. And now, suddenly I find, then I left it very old-fashioned, 14th century, 15th century. But then I thought when I saw these technologies coming in, especially blockchains, the type of blockchain technologies that are coming in with IoT, I found that this is going to create a revolution in terms of the way it will transform the industry. So let me talk about commodity chain, not supply chain. I am not going to talk about value chain either. Commodity chain, the big difference is, having worked in the spices industry and the coffee industry, the commodity chain is basically, the line is very clear. Here is a producer, here is a consumer. And both are sad people. Consumer is paying more than what he deserves, what he needs to pay. And the producer is getting always less than what it is, what he should be getting. Now, this is a very old story, right? UNCTAD debated it for years, primary commodity producer, terms of trade going against them. Well, I am trying to tell you that there is a difference between supply chains and commodity chains as I see it. Now, this may not go with what Porter sees or the gurus of strategy see it, but the simple point is, in a commodity chain, you look at both ends and try to come to the middle. In a supply chain, you are looking segmentally and then reaching the end. And that makes a big difference in the way you look at things. So this is the second definition. So I'll skip a few slides. Distributed network, this thing. I am going to focus on pepper. You know about pepper, of course everybody knows about pepper. Old-fashioned crop. The many East India companies that we saw, British East India Company, before that the French East India Company, the Dutch East India Company, all of them came in search of pepper. And now I am in search of pepper to see how technology can apply to it. So it is from Western Ghats. Now, Western Ghats is, biogeographically speaking, the most sensitive area in the world, biodiversity-wise. And all the plantation crops are coming from there. And plantation, the biodiversity specialists would say, is monoculture. And see the paradox? And this is exactly my focus. So I start with this man. I don't understand economics well enough. I don't understand history. I don't understand geography. Therefore, I will speak about all the three in this presentation. Vasco da Gama. Have you heard about him? There is no. I find him a fascinating person because he landed up in Calicut. That is where I come from, Kerala. So he landed up in Calicut in looking for pepper and cinnamon. Now, Sanjay Subramaniam has written a wonderful book on Vasco da Gama. Vasco da Gama came for spices and he came with a mission. When he landed up, he could understand that Muslim traders were there, Arab traders were there in Calicut. The ruler was a Hindu, Zamorin. And the remaining he thought were Christians. Actually, they were not Christians, they were Hindus. So the point was his understanding of the place where he landed was absolutely nothing. Imagine today's world, in the information technology world, he would have been perfectly informed. He would have created virtual realities and augmented realities of who were the traders and who were this thing, and sorted out a very big information asymmetry problem of understanding the consumer. So he comes, the story is that he comes and meets a Zamorin, a very old man, and he's a ruler, and he gives him some velvet cloth, he gives him wine from Portugal, he gives him everything and says, I want to sign a treaty with you. And the Zamorin says, the story goes, the Zamorin says, treaty? With what? With these kinds of crap that you are giving me. I thought you will bring me gold. And Vasco da Gama did not have any gold. Why? Because his country was poor, basically, and it was controlled by mercantilism. Mercantilist philosophy said, bring gold, don't take it away from us. Create a balance of payment surplus, bring wealth. Courbet, who in France was one of the architects of mercantilism. But Portugal already got sniff of, they are anticipating Courbet many years ago. So Vasco da Gama somehow, because the Zamorin was a nice person, he was only used to seeing Arabs. Now he is seeing a white man landing up. So he says, okay, I'll give you some rights, go to the bazaar and trade whatever you want. And Vasco da Gama, being Vasco da Gama, he came with 4 ships and 2 of his brothers heading the navy. Terms of trade were favorable. He said that gunpowder is there on my ship. If you don't give me sufficient spices for 1 unit of velvet cloth, I am going to bombard your base. So carried a huge booty of spices in a large ship. Now those days ships were going on sails, so it was wind direction. Right? He goes, returns to Portugal, goes and very proudly goes to King Manuel, who supported and financed his travel, puts a pepper from Malabar and says, this is the pepper that you sent me for, black gold. But I had no yellow gold to give him, but still I brought him. Gunpowder made the difference from my ships. So he puts it on the table. Manuel consumes it and understands the fragrance of, the spices. Today, King Manuel is not alive, his successors are there. I don't know where his successors are. The Prime Minister of Portugal, if that is an approximation for a ruler, he would only get pepper from McCormick, beautifully packed and given to him. There is no Malabar pepper. So the point I am trying to say is, Vasco da Gama started the first commodity trial of the spices route of the world. We all hear about Silk Road. We don't hear about spices route. So let me take you through the map. He is credited with that. He comes back a third time. Second time he comes back in 1502. In 1524 he comes. And he is appointed as a viceroy of Portugal possessions in India. And he dies within 1 year, within 4 months because of malaria. So that is his story. That here I am not going to discuss that. Now this is the map, very interesting map. Now what he did exactly was he lands up here, and from here he circles all the way. He came from Atlantic Ocean, circles, gets into Indian Ocean, comes to the Arabian Sea, takes his spices. In between he had some trading in Africa, goes back, takes the whole road through Cape of Good Hope, goes back to Lisbon. In today's terms, the Framework Convention on Climate Change says it is a bad route. Carbon dioxide emissions are plenty if you take that long route. Steamer ships. Vasco da Gama went by sail. Winds directed him. but today fuel oil directs it. So the point is, today it is climate unfriendly. Those days it was natural shipping and the things were environmentally friendly. But today the Climate Change Convention says reduce the carbon dioxide emissions from shipping. Now this is freight. Now look at the other point. The problem is there's an index called the Baltic Index, Baltic's Dry Index. I used to study this shipping industry in those days because of this commodity chain. And the Baltic Index was all about how freight rates will change with every change in oil prices. So it's a co-integration. If you fit in co-integration, you don't get any results, co-integration models. So you have been struggling to understand how the freight rate volatility happens. And the longer the route, the more attractive it is for the shippers to take up their assignments. And the longer the route, the more shippers come in, the more is the fuel oil usage, and the more is the volatility in freight. And a decision has to be taken. Who takes a decision? It is a random shot in the dark. Shippers from India had no clue on how freight rates behave, how the Baltic Index behaves. So this was the problem with the Vasco da Gama's famous spice route. Now let me come to the other route which came. The other route was very simple. It started from Calicut, went up to the Gulf of Aden, and another one went to the Strait of Hormuz. This is Oman, and this goes from Gulf of Hormuz and gets into this tract. And in this tract, this meets the spices, the Silk Road, the famous Silk Road. Both of them meet. Economies of scale, economies of scope, because you are having spices and the Silk Road junction. Travels straight up through the Mediterranean, gets into Gibraltar and turns its way to England. East India Company. English East India Company came. Now what is the advantage of this route? The advantage of this route is the steamers had to be smaller. Just see, the steamers had to be smaller. The freights were less expensive. The Baltic Index did not affect them. It was not long distance shipping. And as a result of it, decision making was pretty simple. And carbon dioxide emissions were low. But the problem with this route is India is denied the Americas for exports because we had to go circle the Cape of Good Hope, take the Atlantic, and reach in New Orleans. So this is the broad. So I would say it is linear, leaner, and lower in carbon footprint. And therefore the externality problem associated with trade is less. Now here I come to what is the first problem with the commodity chain of pepper. First is a gap between what the producer gets. I told you the producer's sob story. And the problem is that of the consumer. Consumer has to pay more for it, and the producer gets less. Now I'm just giving a very simple, bare descriptive statistics. 163 rupees per kilogram is pepper price at the farm in the Western Ghats. And look at the price at which Ducros sells it in Hamburg, 360. In New Orleans, 390. McCormick sells it for 390. Hardly 40% is the realization. This is across the commodity chain. So the producer does not get what is due to him. Now let me come to the ailment one. This ailment one. So Vasco, how do you cure this ailment? Now I fancy that these technologies, that network technologies, distributed network technologies are going to sort out this problem in a bigger way. First of all, if you look at the commodity chain, you start from the farm gate, move to an aggregator. This aggregator is a very modern term. After Uber came, it became a fashionable word. In those days, they used to call it the shipper or the processor. And from the aggregator, it goes to the port. From the port, it is shipped. It reaches the dock in the importing country. There, it goes to a distributor. From the distributor, it goes to the processor, manufacturer. And then it reaches the retailer and the end consumer. This is the chain. Now, in this chain, what used to happen is the logic was recursive logic, recursive flow. You are the upper end, the consumer, is never getting to see the producer. He only sees the shipper and the person who exported. The value has to be passed only recursively. Now, the logic of Vasco da Gama, after Vasco da Gama left 300 years later, the commodity chain shortened. McCormick and the manufacturers in importing countries took to processing spices. As I told you, they mixed it with salt and other things, destroyed the character of the commodities. And as a result of it, the recursive logic was very reinforced with a lot of vigor. Recursive means he is only accountable to the previous person, the previous two people in the chain. Now, that is precisely what is going to be cured if blockchains are going to come. Because blockchain is up in the skies. You can see who has made what movement at what time. And I can tell you this, we are not talking of farmers who are, somebody asked me, isn't it a very illiterate set of farmers, do they understand blockchains? You don't have to understand blockchains. There are associations which do it, multitudes of people who sit and work on it. Farmers need not understand, but a plantation farmer is already hooked to New York Futures Exchange. He knows exactly what is the shipment going to cost. So he is going to be well informed about where the thing happens. Therefore, the recursiveness of the chain gets disrupted. Now look at how I see it. Ethereum is supposed to be a blockchain smart contract system. Now Ethereum promises you to jump the commodity chain, go a few steps ahead and do the work. Now in the 1980s and 90s, there used to be an organization, most of you would have known, a movement called the Fair Trade Movement. The Fair Trade Movement was supposed to reach more value to the producer and his workers. Fair Trade Movement had a problem of information asymmetry. They did not know how to reach the value to the customers because, again, of the recursive problem. They had touch with the exporter. They did not have any clue about who the aggregator was at the exporting end. So those are the things which are going to be disrupted. And aggregators, this is something I'm talking about. Shipments have to be leaner, I told you. They have to be simple, more frequent. Now, why was it not happening? Because there was absolutely no clue on production minus consumption is the stock, which need not be true. The consumption figures itself are fudged. Therefore, the result is the stock at the importer's end is not known. And he says that I want a bulk consignment of this much. It adds to his stocks. Costs of holding that inventory is next to nothing because historical costs, most of it is written down. And most of the working capital that is available are coming from internal reserves of the firm. Therefore, it was not. But it served to depress the prices and fix the contracts. Fixed contracts became the order of the day. And as a result of it, the terms of trade was shifting. Now, in my view, this is hypothetical. There was a perverse logic in this. You know, the warehouses, just now we discussed about economies of scale. I was wondering, we study economies of scale as the lowest point on the average cost curve, right? And we also assume that then it becomes a vested interest to have economies of scale. I am trying to say that you can have economies of scale without size if these technologies are going to come. Now, you will wonder how will that happen? Because your fixed costs are going to practically non-existent. Your blockchains are ensuring that the boundaries of the firm are expanding. So you get into the contract theory of Oliver Hart and others on incomplete contracts. Now, all this is likely to depress the chain and provide greater value to the aggregator. So the interesting part, this is a perverse part of it. Every warehouse holder in India or any part of the world wants his warehouse to be full of stocks. He does not talk of flow. He does not look at throughput, whereas these technologies are all about throughputs and economic order quantity. So I would, these are many more things are there, but Ashok is signaling to me that I have to stop. This is how it looks like. From gate price, the price at the free on board, your shipping freight, port, distributor, manufacturer, retailer, consumer. You are not having any idea whether this will happen. Prices will reduce for the customer. But if there is a solid, this recursive framework is broken, these minuses get out, then obviously if this recursive thing has happened, there can be a direct contract between a importer and a producer aided by exogenous factors like fair trade. Now, this is how I see the positioning of the technology. The next one is this one. This is model 2. All the spices growers after Vasco da Gama left 500 years ago, they are saying that we want our spices to hit the small producers, spices to hit the table, the dining table of the king of Portugal or the prime minister of Portugal. It doesn't happen. So how does it happen? Why does it not happen? Because of the recursiveness of the commodity chain. Because the commodity chain, the person at the end knows only the previous two people. He doesn't know anybody else. But because there is a distributed ledger there, everyone has a clear account of who is a producer, traceability is done, identity preservation is done. You can directly sign subcontracts between the retailer and the retailer will have a clear picture of what is happening. He takes cuts in his margins, passes it on to the farm gate price. Do you see the difference between this model 1 and model 2? McCormick is out. It is direct supply through the chain. And this can be enabled. This can be enabled by very small farms in the Western Ghats, having just 1 acre. Why? For the simple reason that for these farms, scale and economies of scale does not mean size. Scale can be achieved with a smaller size. And why does it happen? Because your fixed cost requirements are less. You are applying IoT, sensors to understand which part of the farm needs to be attended. So your management time and the labor deployment is going to be much more structured. Agriculture is a disguised unemployment problem. If we have technologies, now this is being done in Wayanad. We have technologies, we can say that pepper, pepper has a problem. If there is a rain, it's too splashy, it gets a virus. So currently, all the entire labor and managerial time is devoted to handling a problem which we are not sure whether it is there. But with sensors, which are applied to farms, sensor prices are coming down. It can be, at least in the plantation sector, it can happen. It can promise much more. So all this is there. So we will have quality risk minimized thanks to blockchains. We will have fair trade certification for small farmers, which can be done. And consignment-wise risk assessment is done because when the pepper catches moisture when it crosses the oceans. So you have IoTs there to detect it. So the FDA sitting in the importing place, the Food and Drug Administration, the customs authorities cannot reject a consignment on flimsy grounds. Even that is going to be, that happens very frequently. So ochratoxin contamination, all this is handled better. So the larger theoretical implications is all this. We have a lot to do on fixed price contracts, so you have to relook at Tirol Maskin 1999 model 1, which I showed is related to that. You have a Grossman-Hart-Moore model, which we discussed in economics, which has to be revisited. It is about information asymmetry getting sorted out. Economics of scale can happen without size, and these are some of the issues. Contestable markets, because more small producers are getting in, the market gets contestable. And then created comparative advantage, which is basically what the newly industrialized countries were. They created technologies and said that natural resources are not important. So your neo-Ricardian theories, Heckscher-Ohlin theory that your natural resources are going to decide your comparative advantage has been rendered outdated. But for the first time, we are going to have a natural resource endowment overlaid by technology, which is going to give better returns to small farmers. We are not talking of large corporates. So this is the context, and this is the revenge of the Samarin. The Samarin this is a small farmer from the Western Ghats. He managed to put his pepper on Harrods without any blockchain. Now this means this man has done amazing things. His packaging, everything is done. You know why it happened? Because of this gentleman, Colin Hamilton, an antiquarian bookseller and publisher. He wrote, his pepper is perfumed. And then he gets Al-Fayed is holding Harrods. And he sold this idea to the CTOs, the CMO, the CTO of Al-Fayed. And there, all the retail shelves fees, everything is waived off, and he positions himself. This I would call is the revenge of the Samarin. Thank you.